Hi, I'm Bill Bradley. Join me for a recent excerpt of American Voices. In a world with modern technology, it's nice to know that kids of all ages and adults will put down their phones and come together for the slow process of harvesting ice. The harvest takes place each year in South Bristol, Maine. In the 1800s, people used jagged-toothed tools to cut large blocks of ice from a pond. Then they'd float the blocks up toward the ice house, where they'd store the ice, and they're still doing that today. In fact, people come from all over the world, even sunny Florida, to join the frigid fun. Ken Lincoln has been harvesting ice since he was a kid. He now oversees the harvest and is the president of the Thompson Ice House Harvesting Museum in South Bristol, Maine. Ken is here with us now. Ken, welcome to American Voices.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
So when you were a kid, who taught you to harvest ice? And what was it like for you to join in?
Well, basically, we skated on this pond when we were young before they did the harvest. And then when we got up around 9, 10 years old, a friend of my father's who was in the Navy with him took over the ice operation. And we joined in and helped on the pond, helped to float the blocks up to the chute. And that's really what got me started in the ice business.
What's your favorite memory as a kid being in the ice harvest?
Oh, I think one of the biggest things was, you work out on the pond where it's not real dangerous. You got to pick, you're floating ice up the channel. Maybe you would be caulking the seams so they didn't refreeze. But when you were asked to move up and go into the ice house, which is where you stack the ice, it's a very fast paced and it's really hard work. But, it's almost like you're graduating up to something. So that was a really good feeling when they asked me to join in the ice house.
Did anybody ever fall in the water?
Back when I worked with the guys that did it commercially, rarely would someone go in the water. I remember one year a guy working the channel, he slipped and went completely under. He was smoking a pipe. He come back up out of the water and the smoke was still coming out of his pipe.
Yeah, I wonder how that's possible. He was underwater?
I guess the water froze before it put his tobacco out.
Okay, well, what's the history of the ice harvest?
The ice house was started in 1826 when a man named Asa Thompson dammed up. It's a spring-fed pond, so he dammed it up and started cutting ice. I mean, that's about the time Frederick Tudor started doing it in Massachusetts, and it became a real big industry. But up here in Maine, every farm would have a ice pond because the dairy farms would need it to keep the milk cold. It was their refrigeration. And this Frederick Tudor, who was the king of the ice, he shipped it all over the world. And he had a fellow that worked with him that, changed the approach. Instead of horse-drawn shavers, they came up with motorized saws and the bigger hand saws. So it developed into a really lucrative business. Here in Maine, it was a more lucrative business than the lumber industry.
Is that right?
Yeah, until the invention of the refrigerator. That ended the ice era.
Right. So exactly how does one harvest ice? How do you cut the blocks and how do you transport them? And what is the ice house like? Why won't the ice melt there?
Basically, we'll start with harvesting the ice. You have to make a channel from the chute that shuttles the ice into the house. And then once you get out onto the pond about 100 feet, you mark out a grid, and the blocks are 22 inches by 32 inches. And then whatever thickness they happen to be that day. The ideal thickness is 14 inches. So you make all these cuts and you have to make them with a handsaw and cut all the way through the ice. Then you take a motorized circular saw and you set it to within 4 inches of the depth of the ice, and you cut a grid out. And then you finish the cuts with the handsaw. You float the blocks up the channel, and they go into a chute, which is shuttled by a truck. It used to be horses, and they slide into the ice house. And in the ice house, you have 5 or 6 good, strong guys. They slide them into place and stack one tier on the next on the next. The ice house is actually a wooden frame building. The walls are 10 inches thick, and they're boarded both sides. The walls are filled with sawdust, which is a great insulator. And then at the end of the day, you put hay on top of the ice to help keep it for the summer.
Mm. So do you use original tools that they always have used, or you do different tools, or what?
No, basically the tools we use are the ones that were there when Asa Thompson started the business. We do have a motorized circular saw. Oh, I'm going to say 40 years. It was probably made in 1905. And then usually in July, we start taking the ice out and selling it to the public.
Well, who would buy it these days?
One of our best customers are the people that go offshore sailing. This natural ice will last 3 times longer than man-made ice. So
Why is that?
I believe there's less air in it, and it's frozen at such a cold, there's so much frost in it. I mean, usually in winter, we get well below 0. So this ice has got a lot of frost in it, whereas manufactured ice is frozen, just under 30 degrees.
So when you oversee the harvest, what's the toughest part for you? What do you worry about?
My biggest worry is a bunch of people falling in at once. They tend, when we cut a hole in the pond, we've created a weak spot on this point of the
Right.
field and the channel.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that.
Yeah, and it's really the best place to be in the action and see what's going on. So the visitors tend to gather up on this corner, and the ice will actually sink, and there'll be water up around their ankles, and I'll have to go over and tell them you need to disperse because you're sinking. And my fear, if a dozen or 20 people went in the pond all at once, it'd be pretty tough to get them all out.
Right.
Fortunately, we have never had that happen. There'll be 1 or 2. Last year, we had 12 people get wet off and on the course of the day. And last year, we only had about 5.5 to 6 inches of ice, and the edges of the pond never really froze.
Mm.
So, it wasn't people going completely in. They went in up to their knees. Some slipped and sat down in the pond, but
Well, do you think that ice harvesting is endangered by global warming?
I absolutely do. We keep track. We have record of the thickness of the ice for the last 32 years. In the first 20 years, we had 4 years that the ice was under 10 inches. In the last 12 years, we've had 10 years the ice is under 10 inches.
Wow, that's a big difference. So you're also in construction, right?
Yeah, I've been self-employed builder for basically my whole life.
What's the oddest thing anyone's ever asked you to build?
We just built half of a regulation gymnasium for a woman so her 2 kids could play basketball.
You're kidding.
No, it's
Half? You mean half court?
yeah, it's a full regulation half-court basketball court. That was a fun project.
How high was the ceiling?
Oh, the ceiling's gonna be 20-something feet.
Yeah,
And
that's amazing. How old are the kids?
I think one's 12 and one's 14.
Gee, if I'd had that in my backyard, I wouldn't have to wake the coach up in the morning so I can get a key to go to the gymnasium in the public school.
Isn't that true? Yeah.
You were a town councilman for 30 years, so you know about the responsibility for the community.
Yes. It's one of the biggest obstacles, I guess you could say, is keeping an elementary school open here, because the average kid that grows up here can't afford to buy land and live here.
Yeah.
Our school population keeps, it's dropping.
Hmm.
So that's a tough one.
That's probably one of the things that people might not understand about South Bristol, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of a tough thing that people learn. What else would you like them to know about the town? Speaking as someone who's been on the council for 30 years.
It's a beautiful little fishing community. We have 900 year-round residents. We probably have 3,400 in the summertime. The community is very supportive of the school, supportive of the ice house, the historical society. It's a nice, quaint town. We've lost our local little store that's not open year round anymore. The people have moved from the island. We have an island attached to the peninsula. People have
Mhm.
moved from that and the downtown up into further inland in the town.
Mm.
But it's a great community. I love it here.
Well, thanks, Ken, very much for coming on and explaining what could be a lost art at some point.
Well, either that or we're gonna have to start going north to cut ice, but I got my fingers crossed.
Well, keep the practice alive.
I'm gonna try as long as Mother Nature will let me, and as long as my body will let me.
Great. Thanks for coming on American Voices.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
I've been speaking with Ken Lincoln, who oversees the ice harvest in South Bristol, Maine. He's also the president of Thompson Ice House Harvesting Museum. To find out more, visit us on Facebook. It's American Voices with Senator Bill Bradley. And we're now also on Instagram, so I hope you'll check us out there too. On Instagram, our page is Bill Bradley on Sirius XM. Thank you for listening to American Voices here on my YouTube channel. For more interviews celebrating the goodness and creativity of the American people, click the subscribe button below.